So I was trying to do my homework and find out about you and where you might be coming to this conversation from. And because I'm such an embarrassing ignoramus on the question of video games and gaming and esports and all of the areas of your expertise, I found it really hard to decipher in kind of layman's terms, like where you're at politically. So I would love for you to sort of orient me towards where you're coming to this conversation from. And I'm sure it will be really interesting to your viewers as well.
Oh, I mean, look, so I get asked that a lot. And I think, the first thing I would say is it's probably hard for me to orient myself politically anyway in the current landscape, because, I grew up in what they call the Labour heartlands, the Labour Party in the UK. So definitely a lefty, former member of the Socialist Workers' Party, by the way. I used to pay my dues for that. Went on all the marches as a youngster. But, somewhere along the line, you start to realize what's realistic and what isn't. And I don't think that's the machine changing you. I think it's that you accept that radical change is never a possibility unless you want to live in a country where they have, violent coups d'etats and things like that. So I wouldn't say the dial moved a great deal for me, but I did notice in about 2015, 2016, I've always been, I thought I was progressive, right? I grew up with, Indian family, even though I grew up in a part of the world where it wasn't particularly racially diverse. I never had a racist bone in my body. I mean, it helped that my father was in prison. He was really racist. He was an arsehole.
Wow.
So he wasn't around to raise me. I think I rejected a lot of that because of him. And then it got to 2015, 2016. And I was living in America at the time. I was working for TBS on a TV show. And that was, of course, when the madness started to set in. And I was looking at what was progressive and what was liberal and left-leaning. And increasingly, I was like, it's not me. I'm standing still. All my values remain true. And these motherfuckers are going off over the horizon. And it's crazy. And so that's kind of what I feel happened. I think there's a lot of people like me who we get called Nazis now, and we're the people that essentially constructed the left out of socialist worker ideology. And yet we're told we're repulsive human beings by this new, extremely radical and fervent group of the left. So it's really hard because, I'll be honest with you, I listen to the occasional Tucker Carlson monologue and find myself nodding my head, which I don't know how to reconcile that as a journalist that was brought up to naturally be critical of Fox News. So I don't know. I guess you'd have to tell me where I am politically. I'm really not so sure.
It's so interesting because I think that you exist in the exact place that has been sort of erased from the public conversation. And so it's so fascinating that you're sort of both coming at this from the UK, but also from that working class point of view, that the new left, the new progressive left, which, Thomas Piketty calls it a Brahmin left for a reason, right? Because it's made up these highly educated elites who have no idea what it's like to be working class and have engaged in this sort of mass deplatforming of working class views and voices. But I'm sorry, I have to hear more about your father and that and what that was like growing up and how that influenced you. That's so interesting.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much what it says. He was young. Grew up in a really abusive household. I mean, I went to visit him a few times in prison. I think the last time I saw him, I was 17. And he grew up in a really abusive household, domestic abuse against his mother. So his first spell in prison was actually for stabbing his own father. And so he just went off the rails when he got out, couldn't get a job, the cycle. And obviously, I think he fell in a little bit with the National Front types because that was a time in history when, of course, jobs, we had people who'd come in to fill a job deficit from the Commonwealth. And obviously, when that changed and there was an economic shift, he was obviously, affected by that as an unskilled former convict. And so he was one of the people that these radical right-wing groups prey upon, the disaffected working class. And so obviously, I mean, even at age 12, I could put together what had happened. It's like they were never going to get me because I was super aware of how they operate and the bullshit and the rhetoric that was predicated on it. So that's why, like, when people call me a Nazi or a racist or right wing, it rankles a bit more than it probably should, I think.
Wow, what a story. My gosh. I mean, like, you talk about having credibility to speak to this issue. You have it really in spades.
That's so very kind of you to say.
Have you written about this?
The funny thing is, because it started to creep into my world, in video games, we saw a lot of, like, the worst thing that ever happened to journalism, I think, was you got all the college bloggers, of which I was one, with no training, and they sort of just merged into the media set. And unfortunately, American academia seems to be promoting some really fucking wacky ideas. There is no getting away from that. And so that has spilled over into even what I do. I mean, there's a review. I'll probably share it with you just so you can get an idea of what our landscape looks like. And it was in Variety, and they had to review a game called The Division 2, which is, Tom Clancy, men with guns, CIA operatives, all that nonsense, And they didn't want to review it. So instead they said, The Division 2 reminds me of Tucker Carlson. Here's why Tucker Carlson is bad for America. And it's like, this is garbage. Like, why isn't an editor saying, I asked you to review the game? And, so it's everywhere. It's become ubiquitous. These American, fresh from academia. I get it. I admire the moxie, but your ideas are rotten, is my opinion.
So I have a theory about why academia and rotten ideas go together so well. So I don't know if you know this, but I got a PhD.
Oh, wow.
I got a PhD in nonsense because it really was in absolute nonsense. And the reason for that is because, so I got a PhD in literature. And I mean, I'm sure you know all this, but like, in order to get a PhD in literature in America, you have to come up with something new. Like, you have to come up with something new about the text you're working on. I was working on 18th century texts. So what that means is that for 200, 300 years, people who were smarter than me have been talking about the books that I had to come up with something new to say about. Right. What that means is that everything that is true about those books has pretty much already been said, right? Somebody smarter than me came up with the thing that is correct about this book in like 1925, but you can't get a PhD by writing a book that says, actually, Carlyle got it right in 1925, case closed, right? So the premium in all of the humanities are like this. The premium is on saying something interesting, and it really doesn't matter whether or not it's true. In fact, it can't really be true because, like I said, all the true things have been said. And so there is this kind of emphasis on, being interesting, being provocative, being counterintuitive, as opposed to trying to figure out what you really think about something. And I think that actually comes back to class, because so in America, we have this enormous class chasm that's really opened up between the college educated and everybody else. And a certain segment of the college educated has become actually increasingly very affluent. And I think that is sort of something that really has accelerated this, what I talk about in my book. And it comes back to class, because if you look at the ideas that have been deplatformed from American life, it's ideas that have a lot of sort of intuitive sense, right? Like, for example, gender, right? The idea that like there's a difference between men and women, right? Like that exists. This is the kind of thing that you sort of, it's a common sense view that, 99% of working class Americans hold, right? But what's happened is it's straight out of academia, is like everything that's commonsensical has to be questioned. It's the very counterintuitive take, that actually gender is a choice you make. That's the thing that becomes like, not only premium, but now sort of increasingly taboo to contradict it. And so you have this kind of this operation going on now. And I don't think it's centralized. Like, obviously these people think they're doing good. They think they're standing up for the disenfranchised or whatever, but because people who increasingly have this education, this elite education, have so much cultural power, such a lock on the culture, what essentially happens is 90% of Americans have had their opinions almost overnight become taboo. I let you off once before, but you still got the nerve to come back.